steps approached, she realized this may not be one of Father's men. Hi there. You might wonder what I'm doing. Well, we have kind of a stormy night tonight at the studio and put me in the mood to work on this short story that accompanies one of the paintings that we're actually going to feature on today's show. I like to do that sometimes. And it all started a while ago where I saw someone and I immediately thought of them as looking out of a castle window, maybe a castle tower window. And that's kind of what inspired the whole thing. And that's what we're going to show you on today's show. How to paint from your imagination and where you can find clothing and people to pose for things like this and also give us advice on paintings like this. So we got a lot coming up. Stick around. She fell asleep. Well, here we are. We're ready to start and see how we got this painting started. But before we do, we needed a little advice on this. I'm not a historian myself, and many of you may not be either. But there's people that you can find quite easily that can help us with this. Let's take a look. Now, Trudy, this is a yearly event, and is this depicting any particular thing, or what are we seeing if they come to this is the Fishers Renaissance
Fishers
Fair?
Renaissance Fair.
Okay.
This is during the time of Queen Elizabeth I in the year 1578, what we're portraying.
So for artists, we want to realize that's the time period fair in person. How can we research that? Just by looking at portraits, you're saying?
Looking at portraits, and there are various costume historians. A very well-known one is Janet Arnold. She died a number of years ago, but she was a British historian, a costume historian, and has a fantastic series of books of which she looked at portraits and existing clothing out of the Victoria and Albert Museum. And she has diagrammed them, and they are wonderful resources.
I think I'm doing more erasing than I am writing today. Well, what did you think? Some pretty interesting stuff. It's kind of neat how you initially talk to people trying to get advice to help with painting, and we learn so much more sometimes. So we want to thank them all for that. But back to business, now how we got this painting started. This is more of a kind of refined painting. And all our lights are on top of the black anyway in a painting like this because it's a night scene, so that makes sense. But we have this black tone, and we started out by painting the sky. So let's see how we took it from there. Well, the more I was working on this painting, I just felt I needed more information to do this right with the nighttime lighting that we're doing. So I made a phone call, I made a road trip, and it was interesting. While I was there, I learned there's a lot more to these clothes than meets the eye. Let's take a look. Now here we are with Brian, and he's actually one of the actors at these Renaissance fairs, and he really knows a lot about the time period that we're trying to paint. And you've been doing this a long time and reenacting these?
Sure, I've been doing it 13 years. We started out as a family, and my kids grew up spending weekends at the Renaissance Fair.
So it's kind of a family affair. That's a fun thing to do. I mean, most families don't think to do something like that.
It is, and we wouldn't do it if we didn't enjoy doing it. Like I said, it's a lot of fun.
We're actually doing a painting of one of Brian's daughters, so that's why it's a very valuable resource that we've mentioned before. to try to catch one of these fairs in person if you can, because you get people in very authentic clothing. A lot of work goes into these clothes, right?
Well, we refer to them as clothing rather than costumes.
Okay.
And they're made like clothing. They're made as something you can actually wear. In fact, we wear them 19, 20 days out of the year. So it's got to be built as clothing rather than a costume. And what we do is we can't get some of the actual materials they had then. Textile technology has changed.
Right.
So what we do is we look for things that are similar, and then we try and recreate the details. One of the advantages of Renaissance paintings, the actual period paintings, is the level of detail in them. People like Nicholas Hilliard would do miniatures, and you could actually see the pearls painted on the clothing and see the jeweling, and in some cases you would see the pins in a ruff. You could they'd actually do it. It was that detailed. So we have a great set of reference materials to recreate the clothing of that era.
Yeah, it's something that we don't really think about reenacting anything in history. We have to rely on the artists that were back then. If it wasn't for them, we would just have to imagine how things look. So the fairs that you do in particular, this is what time period, if we did paint these clothes, what were we painting?
This is Elizabethan Renaissance, so we're talking 1560 to 1590.
Okay.
We refer to it as the chapter of Elizabeth's reign, not a specific page. We don't have a specific year. The clothing of the era was very specific in its shape.
Okay.
What you'll see is earlier in the Queen's father's, Henry VIII's life, you'll see the big exaggerated hanging sleeves and the long skirting on the men's doublets. It was a very specific look to that time period, and it changed. And during Elizabeth's life, it was a very triangular shape. The ladies' bodices were triangular shaped this way, their skirts were shaped that way. And then towards the end of her reign, they kind of got exaggerated. You'll see the big, what we refer to as wheel farthingales, which looks like a tire around her waist, and the skirt does something like that.
Yeah.
So again, we pick sort of the middle, where it's a very fitted shape. For a woman, it's a triangle this way and a triangle this way.
So if you do go to one of these fairs, no matter what part of the country you live in, talk to these people and really see what are they depicting, because if you do put them in a painting, like we're always stressing, whenever we do these subjects on different topics, we can't possibly be experts or scholars in everything, and we rely on people like Brian to teach us in order we do our paintings more correctly. And especially the patrons that buy these paintings, they're fans of whatever it is you're painting, and they're going to know more than we do too. So do your research, and this is where we can get a lot of valuable information, so our paintings are technically accurate. Now, sometimes we paint from our imagination, use a little artistic license. I think I'm doing some of that with the painting now. I guess the clothes themselves were very important, much more than they are today. What you actually wear, right? And it's something to do with your status in society. Right?
Absolutely. The society of the time was very stratified. You had your place in society. And there wasn't a lot of movement between those places. But then again, it was where you were supposed to be. So if you were of what we commonly call the peasant class, you would wear very rough homespun clothing, thicker, coarser textures, leathers, wools. And then you'd get into the merchant class, which was up and coming in that period, and it was just growing at that time. And you'd find more refinement, better quality, finer detailed clothing. Then you get into the gentry and the nobility, and that's where you see your fine silks and your finely woven fabrics, things like that. So what we strive to do is sort of portray that chain of being. It starts up here and goes all the way down, and bring that to life, so that the patrons who come to the show can can get a feel for that flavor of what life may have been like then.
Well, this is some very valuable information, and we really have to thank Brian for all these great tips that will help us do better paintings as artists. And if you can come across one of these fairs anywhere near your area, it's really worth the trip, and it will make your paintings not only more credible, but you have so many more ideas of things you can paint that aren't normally in your surroundings. So I thank you very much, Brian.
It's my pleasure.
Some pretty interesting information that Brian gave us, again, about how important clothes were to society back then. It really defined who you were. So let's get back to our painting. All right, we have kind of the mid-stage of this painting. I just want to kind of review a few things to make sure we learn something out of this. Number one, you know, doing this kind of technique of kind of glazing and doing layers one thing at a time, you see I started to just take kind of our black face and another, so it's really just kind of a Frankenstein collage of different things, but it's really fun. You have all these different choices. That's what this is doing. It's giving you lots of choices, and you can really see what something looks like. Before we see, we still, you know, do practice paintings and studies and sketches, and you find you can actually combine a lot of those things with, you know, the computer and photos. You can actually make a black and white printout and draw on there. That way it's part, even if it's a printout of your painting halfway done, you can see how it looks to draw more things on there. Maybe even make a color print and then paint on there. You know, you can combine this multimedia things. You don't have to limit yourself to just one thing or the other. But definitely take advantage of technology today. I'm sure Michelangelo would have used this stuff had it been available.